Well, William, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. Essex County Cricket sports psychologist, and I'm sure you're going to be telling us some fascinating insight into your role. You joined the club in 2014, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Paul. During Paul Grayson's last year, Chris Silverwood was assistant coach, Foz was the club captain, and Tendo was the one-day captain. Yeah, it was really good to join the club then, and it's been a fascinating 5 or 6 years since.
Yeah. Just before then, what was your background? How did you come to Essex? It's not a full-time role, is it, William?
No, that's right. So for the past 15 or 20 years, I've been combining working as a Olympic, Paralympic sports psychologist with working as a leadership coach in organizations. So in terms of sport, I have worked with the British canoeing team, the British rowing team, the rowing team since 2007, and I've worked with Team GB at the sort of Beijing Olympics, at the Macau training camp, and at 2012 with the Paralympic rowing team. So I'm sort of steeped in sport, but at the same time really interested and do a lot of work in leadership development and leadership coaching.
Right, and on that, could you just expand and tell us about your role as a sports psychologist? What it embraces? I know we can have to be brief, but just to give us an insight into what the role is actually all about.
Yeah, so I think there are two big strands. Clearly, working with every player to help them be the most psychologically skilled they can be, both to train as well as possible and to perform as well as possible. But in parallel, it's also just about helping them psychologically in any aspect of their lives. Because if one aspect of their life isn't working well, it will leak into how they train and how they play. And as a club, I think Essex are really good at looking after the whole person with their players. And actually, I think that's part of it, what gives them really good performance success, as well as being the right thing to do. I also work with the coaches and the support staff, because really they're all psychologists with a small p. All of the coaches are influencing and working with the players. And in the 20 days a year I do, a lot of what I can help the most with is helping the coaches have a really good insight, without giving away any confidentiality, about how they can get the most out of the players. So there's sort of the headline areas of what I do as a sports psychologist at Essex.
When you first came to Essex, did you find perhaps in some areas some resistance towards your role? Because this has been an increasing role, the importance of psychology and leading on to mental well-being of all the players. But it's a fairly recent phenomenon, isn't it, in professional circles? I mean, sort of probably 15 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been having the same conversation because the role wouldn't have existed as such.
Yeah, I think especially over the last 20 years and 25 years, sports psychology has shifted from something fringe to how can I get the extra 1%? And it shifted from a long time ago, players possibly felt more vulnerable and more slightly defensive about that it may suggest something was wrong with them. Now the attitude much more is, how can I improve? How can I use anything to help me? Having said that, in any group of players or a group of rowers, there'll be people who really want to reach out to me regularly, and there'll be people where it's much less frequent, if at all. And part of my job is to really respect that, because everybody has their own way of managing their own psychology. And I need to be available to respond when people want to engage, but not actually sort of be too driving in telling people how they should manage themselves.
Right. So in the 5-6 years that you've been with the club, we've seen some great success in the last 3 years or so. And I'm sure that you've certainly played your part in bringing perhaps a positive attitude where perhaps there was negativity. And I'm saying the negativity insofar as falling short, particularly in knockout games where we seem to get to the last hurdle and just not get over. But from building on that, because obviously the ability was there, but couldn't just perhaps conquer the psychological barrier that existed. And once you get into a winning vein, there's nothing like confidence to bring success, is there?
No, that's right. I think the first thing I'd say about these sort of knockout matches, which obviously have been talked about for a long time, is the margins in these T20 and 50 over matches are incredibly, incredibly small. And so really my approach has not been to do anything very different, but really to work with the coaches in just working from the ground upwards, just to say each season, are we doing everything that we should be doing? And if I would sort of cut to the quick about the success in the knockout matches, obviously we had some, we were in a very, very tough position where results had to go our way last year in the T20, and they did. And obviously I had no part to play in the results going our way. And I'd say that, the success that we had last season, a lot of that is simply that we have such a cohesive unit, which is really well led from the committee down through the coaches, through Mags, through all the coaches, through the captains, into the whole team. This is one of the most cohesive units that I've worked with, and it's one of the most well-led units that I've worked with. So there is no magic wand here. It's more of an accumulation of doing the right thing, with some very positive characters coming to the fore. And I think you mentioned Simon Harmer, obviously a very positive character who really embraces the big moment, as do really the rest of the team.
Yeah. Interesting. You mentioned last season, and if we look at last season, towards the end of the season, we got to a situation both in the red ball game and the 2020 where every game was a cup final. We couldn't lose. We couldn't afford to lose a championship match, because that would have virtually left the way clear for Somerset. 2020 in the qualifying stages, it got to the towards the end where we just had to keep on winning, and then of course getting to the quarterfinals, you've got to keep on winning. By that stage of the season, and it is a long season, players would have been not only physically quite drained, but I presume mentally drained as well. So what was there anything that you were able to say in general terms, to not looking at individuals, that wouldn't be fair, I'm sure, William, but as a general team, to help boost them and give them that 1% that perhaps that you talked about earlier on?
Well, I actually think most of that came from the coaches and came from Tendo and Simon Harmer and the senior team. So at times I was talking to the coaches, I was talking to some of those players, and part of my role is to work with the captains, but that might have been 3 months previously where I'm helping them plan. Generally, in how I work, I'm actually not communicating closely with the players as they go into a match. We actually have a system where that's what the coaches do.
Right.
So and I'm more standing back, and when players want to connect with me, they can, and they do. And the same is true for the coaches. So it's actually the idea that I'm sort of some sort of Svengali psychologist sort of sprinkling wise words is not accurate, because when they're out there, they're on their own and they're with the coaches day in, day out, and that's the unit we're building.
Yeah, it's one of the things, perhaps this is for all sportsmen as well, but certainly with cricketers, to make sure that players maintain that sense of personal self-belief, because if they're struggling with form, it can be a very, very lonely place. I mean, cricket's an interesting sport, isn't it? It's one of those sports, it's a team game, but you can't rely on other team members to help you through. I mean, in a game of football, you can be a very average player, but if you've got good players around you, they'll help you through. With cricket, no one can bowl for you, no one can bat for you, and it's all down to you, isn't it?
Yeah, and so you know, the fundamental building blocks, and especially when people have a dip in form, that will often be a time that I get a bit involved. And often I am helping people focus on their strengths and help them be really clear about what their strengths are. I'm helping them make sure that their routine is what they want it to be, but that has to be the player's own routine, so that they stay in the present. I'm making sure that any self-critical or self-doubting thoughts they have, they're able to put to bed very quickly. Because when a player does have a dip, those things will tend to get a bit eroded. And it's a bit like servicing a car. You know, every player will have somebody who they can talk to. It may be me, it may be the coach. It will often be one of the coaching team, where they just, and I guess, you know, they're tuning themselves up. I think one of the strengths of this squad is how self-reliant they are. My sense is there's an awful lot of coaching that goes on quietly between squad members because they're very trusting. And that's so powerful. And then at the crunch, that really supports the self-belief that they've got each other's backs.
And is that an improvement that you've seen over the years since you've been involved, William? You know, gradually that, everybody for one reason or another has bought into that. And again, go back, the success helps as well, doesn't it? I mean, we got the promotion in 2016, so that from that laid the foundations for the later success. But you must have seen some improvements in your time.
For sure. But I think that you know, there was a lot of successful performance, but maybe not quite maintained. But I think the changes were from the club downwards, in terms of the club simplified their committee structure. And that actually meant that there weren't too many people at a club level getting involved with the coaches. Ronnie took over. And again, that was very positive at the same time as chair of that committee. When Chris Silverwood took over, and then Mags came on board, you know, an unusually positive, humorous, wise coach, Chris Silverwood. Yeah. And so, you know, you've actually got a combination of things going on. Yeah. There were other changes too. But all of that, it's almost like, if you can think about sort of cogs in a quite a complicated machine, several things shifted a little bit, which really made a big difference, is my sense. Right. And then just meant that what had been working at times really well, but not quite as consistently, built in confidence. Right. And I would pick out, you know, Chris Silverwood and Mags and Tendo as all creating a more and more consistently positive environment, where people weren't scared to fail, but they weren't scared to go and express themselves. Yeah. And that is a massive thing for an environment in which players can thrive.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating. Just fast forward to the present time, really. A big challenge for you, and one I'm sure you wouldn't have expected to have dealt with in February time, but the players are on furlough now, and preparing players to meet furlough and to deal with it while it's on. I mean, they're natural athletes, they want to be out playing. That will present challenges to them individually and as a group. Have you been called upon a lot to work with that facet of the problem that exists at the moment, William?
Well, as a staff unit, we, as soon as lockdown was announced and was heading into lockdown, we started to work on, okay, what do the players need? What do the staff need? And having a system of checking in, having a system of just, so we have a very simple RAG rating system where we're aware of all of the players and all the staff members of, you know, who's thriving physically and mentally, who may be struggling a little bit, and maybe who's struggling a bit more. And it's not that each of us is ringing everybody up, but partly because they're on furlough, but also, you know, if you ring somebody every week and say, how are you, in a slightly laborious way, it's not really what they need. So it doesn't matter who does it, but between us, we've kept an eye on people's well-being and kept in contact. And isolation has been, so actually I think it's less about furlough and it's more about the lockdown and the fact that, you know, you've got some greyhounds here, you've got athletes who want to play cricket and want to get out. Part of it's been great that many of them have volunteered for the NHS food. My sense is that there's been a very positive attitude. Some of them have been very creative in sort of studying. And really, I think it's more of a question of at times, so I've been doing some webinars. So part of my business, we've been looking at the different phases of lockdown, from leading remotely, working remotely. Anxiety's been a big aspect. I'd say less for the players, or particularly the staff, but generally, general staff members, you know, people out there in the workplace, the uncertainty of going into lockdown and the threat of COVID has created quite a lot of anxiety. So we've done webinars on anxiety management. And so, in fact, Dan Feast asked me to do a couple of webinars for staff members and sponsors, which we've done as well. One on working remotely and one on managing anxiety. And I believe they were very well received.
Yeah, certainly the knowledge and awareness of mental health and mental well-being is so prominent in all walks of life, be it sport, business, whatever. And I guess perhaps is that one of the secrets to address that initially is to spot, if you like, a little crack appearing here and there, which through your work with the coaches and the players, for example, you might just get the semblance that something isn't completely right, and being able to address it right up front rather than when it's too far down the line.
Well, I'd go back actually quite a lot further to actually say, if you have an environment where people can talk about things not going so well as when things go really well, a less macho environment, if you like, then that sets the ground for a much more mentally healthy environment. You know, mental health is a positive thing. You know, if you talk about physical health, are you physically healthy? Yeah, yeah. I'm always happy to be asked if I say physically healthy, that's a positive thing. It's only recently that mental health has started to ease the taboo, because it used to be sort of innately seen as a negative thing.
Yes. That
change is massive, but it starts with just a greater willingness to be a bit more open, day in, day out, in which then it's just more possible to talk about more emotional things, more difficulty, whilst not detracting at all from the mental toughness that is needed to train really well and perform really well when you're in the athletic environment. They're not mutually exclusive.
Right. And is that generally a message for everybody out there, William? If they are troubled mentally, talk to somebody about it. If you like, share the problem and deal with it collectively.
Well, everybody has mental health.
Yes.
And everybody has days or weeks where their mental health is a bit less good.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're about to have a breakdown. It doesn't mean that you're cracking into. It just means, it's a bit less good today. And so even that attitude can just mean one is a bit less defended, because I think where people get a bit into trouble can be the message to themselves, I can't show any weakness. I can't show, especially for men, for young men, where they can get into trouble is not having anybody to talk to and believing that they shouldn't be feeling like this.
Yeah.
And so, subtly, in my work with the players at the beginning of the season, the end of the season, we do actually do a mental health audit where we just sit down and just check in a few things. And normally it just opens up a wider conversation, which is just a good general conversation as well.
Yeah. William, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you for your time. Look forward to seeing you around and about the green sward of Chelmsford in a happier environment for us all anyway. And well done for your part, however important or insignificant that you perhaps portrayed in our success recently. I'm sure it's certainly made more than the 1% difference that you alluded to earlier on. Well, thank you very much indeed for all your involvement.
You're welcome, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to carrying on in the future.